Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to another edition of Think and Grow Rich Live. My name is Dr. Peter A. James, and I am excited to join you all here this morning as we dive on into this phenomenal text by Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. Many of you know it. Those of you who don't, stay tuned, buckle up. We're getting ready to go on a nice little ride, but I'm not alone. Let me introduce you to my host, our host today, Ann McNeil.
And good morning, good morning, good morning. Thank you, Dr. James. My question for all of you today is, how do you transmute your energy? You know, everything is energy, especially your sexual energy. How do you transmute that energy? Well, today's guest, Mr. Dan R. Matthews, is going to help you understand how you can transmute, which is just another way of saying transform that energy from one form to another. And as I begin to delve into this principle today and think about many of the mind stimuli that impacts us, I'll speak for myself. Over the years, I looked at this point that Napoleon Hill makes about this age between 30 and 40, and then 40 to 60. And then after 60, well, I just celebrated recently my 70th birthday. And as I look back on the last, yes, 50 years, the last 50 years, I began to realize that this book and this particular principle had a pivotal point to play in my life. And the more I thought about how I personally transform this energy from one form to the other, I realized that this particular principle had a lot to do with the fact that I have 5 businesses from one page of that book. We're going to talk about this as we get this podcast started. But the question for you today is not about me and the co-host, but the question for you today is this: how do you transmute your energy into your desires, your goals, your mission, your vision? But as Dr. James said, I am not alone. So let me reintroduce our co-host, starting with, yes, Galen Bingham. Good morning. And then Dr. Peter A. James. Good morning, both of you.
Good morning. Good morning. I am so looking forward to this conversation because I think our guest is probably one of the better people on the planet to help us think through and understand this power, this choice that we have to transmute in energy from one state to another state. And here's the thing I really want us to focus on: the fact that it is a choice, it's a decision. Very often, we have a tendency to think that our emotions just are, and we tend to be in a mood, or something happens and we've got to respond. Well, you don't have to do anything. There's a choice that we get to make. We can choose to stay in that state, or we can choose to change and turn it into something different. And I love the way Napoleon Hill talks about the mystery of sex transmutation, the ability to transform energy from one state to another. So can't wait to get into this conversation.
Dr. Peter James, good morning again.
Good morning, good morning, good morning again. Excited to be here. Have you ever felt one day that, you just had the energy, you felt alive, you felt like things were going your way and you could not do anything wrong. Everything you touched turned the gold. Have you ever had that feeling if you are listening and watching today? If the answer is yes, and I'm sure that it is, I wonder how you might be able to continue on that trajectory, as I like to say, how to ride that wave. What might that need to look like for you? Today, we're going to dive on into this chapter, one of my favorite chapters, because in it you could talk about a topic that we sometimes think is taboo, but for the benefit of this conversation, all gloves are off. And McNeil, I'm ready to go in.
All right, well, let's do that. Let's welcome our special guest to the podcast this morning, Good morning, Dan R. Matthews. And I have to say that so we can make sure we distinguish you between all the other Dan Matthews. How are you this morning, sir? Welcome to the podcast.
And thank you, and thanks everybody for your introductory statements. This is a topic like we just heard from Dr. Peter. This is a topic that is one of those topics that they say don't talk. There are four things not to talk about: politics, religion, money, and sex. You
Ooh,
don't talk about those things in social gatherings because it's considered inappropriate.
but Dan,
Napoleon Hill disagreed. Sorry, Anne.
no, I was just before you start delving into that, I wanted to just make sure I just give you a proper introduction, making sure that we let everybody know a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what brings you here, because I think that we find that when they know your story, they can definitely relate to your glory. So let's just share with all of you a little bit about Dan, and he's going to share a little bit more. But Dan R. Matthews has studied and taught the universal laws of success. And we talked about this a little bit before the podcast started. Uh, he has also taught theology, personal success, and has actually developed a process I would like to suggest of goal setting, relationships, business, and teaching this philosophy as a part of the Napoleon Hill Institute, and also being one of the certified Napoleon Hill coaches. I am for many, I think it's maybe over 20 years now. I can really appreciate a lot of what you shared, Dan, before the podcast started. But also, his background also includes university degrees in physics, in English, and master's degrees in biology, marine biology. Now I'm going to stop there, Dan, and if you would share with our audience before we get too deep into this conversation, and then we're going to go to the 13 principles, a little bit about your background prior to being introduced to this philosophy, and then we'll get to the principle.
Well, Anne, you've asked a really deep question,
That's the
and
idea.
to give you the short answer, I I was started being interested in science when I was just a young kid. It was back in the beginning of the space age with the astronauts just launching their little short journeys and then going once or twice around the Earth, and I was so fascinated with what was going on that I started drawing pictures of rockets and spaceships, and I had a friend that was another kind of science nerd when I was in grade school that we spent a lot of time really diving into what was going on in the world of physics and space exploration. And that fascination worked its way over to the spiritual side. And I started becoming interested in spiritual topics, even as a fairly young kid. And that ended up going into, of course, along came the 60s with all of the revelations that people were having and political struggles that were going on. And I was involved in that time also, but on a spiritual level, looking for truth in my own life and looking for purpose in my own life. And I didn't know about Napoleon Hill, but I had a little copy of James Allen's As a Man Thinketh. I had a copy of Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, and I had a copy of a couple other books that dealt with different religions. And I thought that these religions are all saying the same thing. It didn't matter if it was Buddhism or Middle Eastern philosophy or Eastern religions or the Judaic Christian religions, Islam, all were saying something that was the same, and that was God is love. They all agree on that point. they start to disagree pretty quickly after that, but they all agree God is love. And I thought that seemed like a good place to start. And I went on a kind of a soul journey and spent some time alone in the mountains of Southern California, looking for purpose in my life. And the only book I had of all the books that I had was a copy of the Bible. And I thought, well, my name's Dan Matthews. I've never really read the Bible seriously, but I'll start with Daniel and I'll skip over and read Matthew. And that was really a good choice. And it put me on a different track of looking at the truth of what we see in the world around us from a different perspective. And then my interest in science kept growing, and I ended up in college. My English teacher said, "Hey, you're really a good writer. You should think about teaching English." And I said, "Okay." And within 2 weeks, my physics professor said, "You are an excellent physics student. You should teach physics." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I ended up finishing my bachelor's degree with a double major in physics and English, and went back to grad school, starting in a course, a group of courses that were going to take me to a degree in astrophysics. But my professor that was my advisor was a solid state physics guy. And he said that there really wasn't much future in astrophysics, but there was in solid state physics. And so I started studying solid state physics, which was electricity and magnetic fields and electrical circuits and those kinds of things, and ended up not liking it. So I switched my major from physics after a whole year of physics at the graduate level. I switched my major to marine biology of all things, and got a degree in marine biology. And at the same time, I was teaching on the high school level and filling in for teachers, for instructors, professors at the local community college when they'd go on sabbatical leaves. I was teaching physics or chemistry or astronomy or subjects like that, science subjects, and ended up with a teaching at the university level in those areas, and finally teaching teachers, because I was also a teacher, teaching teachers how to teach, how to improve their teaching skills.
All right. So now we have the backstory. And so for all of you that's listening, we're going to take a moment and walk through the 13 principles, and we're going to come back with Dan R. Matthews, and then we will pick up where he was first introduced to this philosophy, this book, and his thoughts about this principle of sex transmutation. So, Galen, if you would introduce the video, and Peter, if you would tee it up. Dan, just sitting here listening to you is so inspiring, because all of the degrees, and then to bring all of that back to this philosophy and this spiritual journey. I'm going to ask everybody to put on your seatbelts when we come back, because I think we're getting ready for a phenomenal journey. All right, Galen.
All right. Hey, before I get into this video, I just want to acknowledge everybody who's watching us on YouTube live. We've got Johnny Lloyd. Always great to see you. And Doretha Dennis is always in the audience. Carla Hill, Wyman Winbush, the wisdom broker, is here, and Diane King Flowers. Thank you guys for joining us live. If you're watching us live on YouTube, please be sure to hit that thumbs up icon underneath the video, so that YouTube will tell other folks that there's something going on this channel. So, and we're talking about sex. We're hitting one of those areas that we're not supposed to talk about. We're going to talk about it. Now, this video, I love this video because for me, it always highlights the connective tissue between each of the principles. We study each of these principles individually, but when you see them all pulled together, you see the brilliance of how this philosophy nets together in order to allow you to achieve success on purpose. So take a look at this, and we'll be back on the other side.
Number 1 is desire. Napoleon Hill said that everything starts with a burning desire, a compelling reason for doing what it is we do. Step 2 is faith, having belief in our ability to attain that which we desire. Step 3 is what we call autosuggestion. Autosuggestion simply means being very intentional about the things that we are pouring into our thoughts, into our brains, and into our consciousness. Our brains, our minds will receive everything automatically, but we have to work extra hard to make sure that the positive things are what we are feeding ourselves, because those positive thoughts are going to turn into positive actions. Step number 4 is specialized knowledge. No one person knows everything, even about whatever their particular area of expertise might be. And the value of the mastermind principle is using the specialized knowledge of other people. Step number 5 is imagination, the workshop of the mind. Everything starts with our imagination and our thoughts, the burning desire to transform those thoughts into our reality. In order to do that, we have to take a look at step 6, which is organized planning. That is how we crystallize our desire into action, organizing ourselves. Having the thought and not acting on the thought isn't going to get us anywhere. We have the thought, we go through the organized planning to transform that thought into action. Step number 7 is decision. What Napoleon Hill said is the mastery of procrastination. Napoleon Hill said that the antidote to procrastination is simply to make a decision and then move on that decision. Step 8 is persistence. We have to have a sustained effort which is induced by our faith in order to achieve our goals. One of Napoleon Hill's books I love, even the title, 3 Feet from Gold. Those people who became rich during the gold rush in the wild, wild west days didn't do that because they were necessarily smarter or had better information than anyone else. It's because they stayed just a little bit longer. Sometimes people left when they were just literally 3 feet from gold. So hanging in there, being persistent, is step number 8. Step number 9, the power of the mastermind, the driving force. None of us can accomplish anything on our own. Everybody, I don't care who you are, from the most prominent person to the person who might be considered the lowest on the totem pole, everybody has someone who helped them get to where they are. And the power of the mastermind is being able to use those influences around us, use the thoughts, use the knowledge, use the exploration of other people to help us in achieving our goal. Step number 10, the mystery of sex transmutation. This title can be a little confusing, but essentially what the mystery of sex transmutation means is that we oftentimes in our society think of sex as being purely physical. It is absolutely physical, but what Napoleon Hill teaches us is that sex also has an emotional element, and that sex is the strongest of our desires. That if we can take our sexual energy, transform that into positive, creative influences, it can propel us to new heights. And so we spend quite a bit of time talking about the mystery of step 10, which is sex transmutation. Step number 11 is the subconscious mind, which Napoleon Hill tells us is the connecting leap between our human mind and the infinite intelligence, the source of all thought, the source of all creativity. Conscious mind, we spent some time talking about how we use that through the influence of autosuggestion and what we're feeding into our mind. Step number 12, which is the brain, the broadcasting and receiving station of thought. Final step number 13, the sixth sense, the door to the temple of wisdom. This is the final step through which infinite intelligence may and will communicate voluntarily without any effort from or demands by the individual. The principle is the apex of the philosophy. It can be assimilated, understood, and applied only by first mastering the other 12 principles.
All right, and welcome back. We stopped right at the point where Dan was sharing with us his journey to this point of this philosophy with Napoleon Hill. And if you just joined us, we just want to remind you that we're speaking today with none other than Mr. Dan, and I have to keep saying Dan R. Matthews. And Dan Matthews has shared with us his experiences, the many degrees he has, but he's also shared his journey to this philosophy, if you will. So Dan, if you would pick us up now and share with us your first introduction to this book and this philosophy, and then we'll get into the principle.
Well, my first introduction, Anne, to Think and Grow Rich happened about 8 years ago. And I was, my wife and I were kind of surfing YouTube and got to watching some Reverend Ike videos, YouTube videos, who was a great speaker from I think he was from New Jersey, but he was a great speaker and spoke about spiritual topics. And in part of that surfing the YouTube, we ran across a funny looking guy named Bob Proctor, old videos of Bob Proctor. And when I heard Bob Proctor, he was speaking a little bit differently. He had a different presentation style. And something he spoke about really resonated with me at a deep level. And at that time, I'd read the Bible several times cover to cover and realized that all the religions were saying the same story. And here was somebody coming from outside the religious world who was telling the same story too. And ended up my copy of Think and Grow Rich, I actually had, well, it's this is my other copy. I have a copy of Think and Grow Rich that Bob Proctor signed for me. And he said, and it said, Dan, keep your eye on your goal. And I was a student of Bob Proctor's for several years before he passed away. And during that time, I wrote a book. I went to a mastermind group called The Matrix, where goal setting was the main goal. And of course, Bob Proctor was a great student of Napoleon Hill's teaching. That was his main source was Think and Grow Rich, the book. And part of the class that he taught on goal setting inspired me to write a book, which I had published in 2008. And it went on to be an international bestseller on Amazon, called Self-Help Jesus, which tied together, for me, all of the religions and science, the laws of science, and the laws of personal development. They're all the same story. They're all the same laws. They're all the same goal setting is described in everything in nature. Everything that we see in the world around us tells us the same story, whether it's atoms, chemicals, plants and animals, the weather, the flow of water downhill, all tells the same story. And I thought, what a great revelation for me. I'm going to tell people about this. It doesn't matter what you're looking at. If you don't understand it, if you don't understand what's going on in your life, look at the world around you. The answers are all there because they're all created by the same creative intelligence that created the entire universe, created us and our lives. The heart and mind of God is visible in clarity in the world around us. All we have to do is quiet our hearts, open our minds, and pay attention.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to go to Dr. Peter James. I know he has a question. He's weaving back and forth.
Yeah, excited about this conversation there, Dan, and thank you so much for being with us today. And now I'm looking at you a little bit different with your background and your degrees, especially, and even as you have dove into Think and Grow Rich and this chapter in particular, which is a little bit unique that many don't understand, right? And Napoleon Hill says in this chapter, as you mentioned today before our session began, the longest chapter in the text, if I'm not mistaken, sex transmutation, which is involved in the third constructive potentiality, is simple and easily explained. It means the switching of one's mind or dominating mental focus from thoughts and consequent actions of a merely physical expression of thoughts and consequent actions of another nature. It does not mean this celibacy or what we think of usually for sex, but I would love to hear how you describe it and maybe how it has manifested in your life or how you've seen it being manifested.
Sure. Let me tell a little story.
Please.
I was on an airplane from Eugene, Oregon to Denver, Colorado. And I got on the plane, sat down, and the guy next to me had his laptop open. He was a fairly nice dressed guy. I glanced over, and I have actually quite a bit of healthcare experience. I looked over and I could see that he was typing out chart notes, medical chart notes. And I said, you mind if I ask you a question? Had just taken off. He said, yeah, go ahead. I said, what do you do? It looks like you're a doctor. He said, yes, I'm a neurologist. And I said, oh, that's amazing. I love that. Let me ask you a question. Tell me about the three minds. And I thought he'd just go, that's just an old wives' tale. That's just a story they tell. There's only one mind. He said, oh no, he didn't crack a smile. He said, there's more than three minds. And it made my heart skip a beat. I said, this is great new information. And I have a whole lecture now called The 10 Minds. And a mind is created when there's a cluster of nerves in the same place called a neural plexus. And a neural plexus is a thinking center. It has the ability to think. It has the ability to sense its environment. It has the ability to respond and react. And it's the basis of a lot of the things we have, why our heart rate changes when we get scared. You're walking alone at nighttime and you hear a noise and your heart starts pounding. Nothing has happened. Nothing's physically happened to you, but you've had a stimulus that's made a change in your body. Enzymes, hormones, blood pressure levels, heart rates, your body temperature, all controlled by your environment, your response to your environment, by these thinking centers. It's not done by your conscious mind. One of the most powerful thinking centers is your heart. The second is your sex area. The area downstairs that responds to something different. And everybody knows that when that thinking center has been kicked into gear, you can't think about anything else. You are in love. It's a driving force. It's the force of creation. Literally, the force of creation. You have that within your body. And it has its own mind. When you are in love, you can't think of anything else. You can't even, Eating doesn't make any difference. You don't care about meals. All you care about is that person that you love. Imagine if you could change that energy into your goal, into the achieving the life of your dreams, the love of your life, the job that you've always wanted, your great new car, whatever it happens to be. If you had that kind of passion for your goal, it would have to appear by law. It's a desire, a decision, and persistence with expectation. There's a reason that it says, ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be opened unto you. When you want something bad enough, you will go and knock on the door, and the persistence increases if you don't get an answer. Don't walk away. If you walk away, if nobody answers on the first time you knock, knock harder, yell if you have to, wake them up, read the story that Jesus told about it. The stranger, the friend at midnight. It's a parable. It's a story about two people, but it's a spiritual story. And this whole thing about transmutation, the change of energy from one form to another, is happening right now. My thoughts are being transmitted to you through my vocal cords in my mouth, sound waves going out, changing into electrical signals in the computer, going out on the internet, going to your computer, changing back into sound. All they are is sound waves. In by themselves, they have no meaning. But you've learned, your brain has learned how to receive those sound wave signals and translate them into thought. You get an image in your own mind because I have an image in my mind. It's communication. And the same thing happens with sex. It's communication. It's creative. It's reproduction of energy. It's the change of energy from a thought to an action to communication.
I love that, Dan. I love that. My mind went 100 different directions, but I went right back to the text where Napoleon Hill says sexual desire is the most powerful of human desires, as you mentioned. But he also goes on to say people who are driven by this desire in a positive, constructive sense can channel it, right? To develop a keen sense of imagination, courage, willpower, persistence, and the creative ability that are all but unknown at various times in our life. And what I heard from you there is these minds, if we can figure out how to implement, how to channel, as Napoleon Hill says, our possibilities are endless.
It's absolutely true, Dr. Peter.
Yeah.
Absolutely true. This is a transformational force that's in your body. It's the most powerful of the creative forces that you have available to you in your body. It's right up there with art and literature and all the other creative efforts. And you've all been in a social place. You've been in a place with other people. Somebody walks in the room and they say
Mm.
they light up the room. There's a reason for that. They understand. They may not be able to tell you that they understand it, but they understand at a very deep level the power of sex transformation. It's the greatest power in your body, the power of creation. And that person that lights up the room does it so easily. People are drawn to them like a magnet. We say that those people have charisma.
Mm.
Charisma comes from, this is the English lesson. Charisma comes from the Greek word charis, charis, if you do it in English letters. Charis means grace. That confident elegance that we call charisma is also called grace. And it's also been translated in the Bible as thankfulness. Today we would call that gratitude.
Wow,
Listen,
I got 100 more questions, Ann. So
okay,
let me
well,
back off a little bit.
we need to we gotta we're gonna listen, my mind, I'm still on the charisma. Uh, Galen.
Yeah. I am in this place because I'm reading three books at once, which is sometimes is a good idea. Oftentimes it's kind of confusing. But these three books seem to be saying the same thing that I'm hearing from you. Number one, I'm day 39 into my 90-day Bible challenge. So we're trying to read the Bible cover to cover in 90 days. We're on day
Ooh.
30. We're on day 39. Number two, obviously, I'm reading Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And then number three, I was just introduced to The Untethered Soul by
Oh,
Michael Singer.
yeah,
And all three of these books seem to be reflecting notes that I'm picking up from this conversation with you. And it talks about the connection between spiritual and physical. Very often we feel like we're a physical being having a spiritual encounter, but these books often say we are spiritual beings having a physical expression. Help me articulate what that means to someone who doesn't quite understand this idea of a spiritual being having a physical interaction. Because even in our video, it says that when people think of sex, they think of the physical.
that's right.
It is physical, but there's a spiritual element to it that really brings that power, brings that grace that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, and not only is it physical, it's often used in the wrong way. It's used with the wrong intention. And that's where sex gets a bad rap. Sex is the most natural thing in the world. Every plant and every animal understands sex as the reproductive force, the creative force of life, life being given to life. Nothing happens in this world without life being given to life. However you're sharing it, be careful how you use it. But as far as the question goes, you are reading the same story, Galen, from three different perspectives. And you have within you, everybody, it doesn't matter what their walk in life is, what their profession is, what their background is, everybody has within them a being that they understand that speaks to them in a still small voice and always tells the truth and always guides them in the right direction. Everybody. It doesn't matter if it's the president of the United States, if it's a homeless person on the street, if it's a criminal, if it's a preacher. Everybody understands that you have within you something, some kind of energy. If you call it anything, I would call it your soul. You have that observer within you that has never changed from the day you were born. Never changed. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. That soul within you is alive and unchanging because it's the nature of God. It's the nature of the creative force of the universe. It's the nature of creative intelligence, as Napoleon calls it, infinite intelligence. We are all children of infinite intelligence, and that infinite intelligence lives within us and never changes. That's the story you can tell your friends because they'll understand it.
Yeah, I love the way you said earlier that we all understand it, even if we can't articulate it,
Hmm.
even if we can't explain it. I often say to my clients, that we all have a knowing. We all know what we need to do. We
They
just
call
can't.
that they call that intuition.
Yeah,
Intuition means the knowing.
yeah. And we can't always articulate it. And we think if we can't answer the question, then we must not know. And I explained that that's not true at all. It's just the part of the brain that controls your intuition is not always linked to language. And we can know a thing and just not be able to explain it. Why did you choose to love only one person for however many years of your life? You know, because you've been there, you've done it. You might not always be able to find the words to explain it. You can use analogies, you can use metaphors, you can talk about poems, and that's your attempt to put language around this thing that you absolutely know. So thank you so much for highlighting the connection between all these books that I'm reading.
And the reason you can't articulate it is because the part of your mind that knows language doesn't know the soul.
Mm.
Your conscious mind is not aware of your soul.
Hmm.
You know your soul at a deeper level, and your conscious mind is only for analyzing the world around you. Your body is a machine that's made to survive and reproduce. And the survival mechanisms are all controlled in your conscious mind. That's why you hear a noise at night outside. You wake up and you're in high alert. Something's kicked in, and your conscious mind goes into gear. And it's a problem-solving tool. It's not a metaphysical tool for searching your soul.
I love it. I love it. You're
That's
also bring
that's in your heart.
you're also bringing to mind, and I'm going to introduce another book that just keeps coming back to my mind here, How Emotions Are Made by Laura Feldman Barrett. Oh my gosh, you're just bringing all these back to mind. Ms. Ann, I need to turn this back over to you before this becomes a book report.
Well, 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 I want to just remind all of our listeners who may have just joined us that we're speaking with Dan R. Matthews. And as you can tell, he has studied the universal laws of science, theology, personal success, all of these that relate to goal setting, your relationships, your business, and his background. And I have to keep saying this so that those who may be listening in the future understand, all of his degrees and everything that he's learned is culminating with this principle and with this philosophy to help us understand how to live a better quality of life as we understand how to transmute this energy from one form to another. Now, I want to encourage all of you that's listening in on YouTube. If you have any questions, please put your questions in the chat, and we will do our very best to answer those questions before we start wrapping up, because I don't know where the time went. It is almost time to land the plane, as Galen likes to say. But I have one more question for you, Dan. If there was something about this principle more than anything else that you'd like to share with our audience in terms of how they can transmute their own energy, maybe just one exercise or one skill or one tool, what would that be?
It probably for me, Anne, would be focusing your attention, because you don't have to focus your attention when it comes to sex, because your body just has a mind of its own, because that thinking center that controls your sexuality is a mind in itself. But one thing that it tells us how to do is focus our attention. And if you can take that same principle, if you can bring up with that same feeling of passion, and I'm not talking about lust, I'm talking about focused attention to make something happen, focusing your attention and your energy on making something happen in your life. That is the magnifying glass that moves the universe. Focused attention tells God where you want energy to move, and God wants everything for the best for you. You're not dealing with having to say, "Oh Lord, forgive me for I'm unworthy." You are worthy and you are accepted. The sun shines on the just and the unjust alike. You are worthy. You are accepted. And as a child of the King, the child of infinite intelligence, you have the right to ask for what's yours. The thing that you love in life. Focus your attention on it and practice focusing that will. Focused attention on one thought to the exclusion of all other thoughts. I'm going to say that again. Focused attention on one thought to the exclusion of all other thoughts makes things happen. And that's where you bring the energy in. That's where you bring the emotion in. And the emotion is how great it feels to be the person who is a success, to be the person who has achieved the goal, to be the person who has found the love of their life. My wife just drove in the driveway one day. I didn't even know who she was. I used to make surfboards also. She wanted a surfboard. And I said, "What are you riding now?" Because I was a surfer also. I enjoyed that Ride the Wave, Peter. And she showed me what board she was riding. I said, these three are perfectly good boards. Ride them. I won't make you a board. She said, "You won't make me a surfboard?" I said, "No, you've got perfectly good ones. Use those." Well, it turned out one thing led to another. She came back. She wanted a ding repair on another board. I said, "Okay, I'll do a repair on that board, but I won't make you a board." Now I've made her 3 surfboards.
Sound like she wanted the board maker, not the board.
That's it.
I don't think she really knew me either, but she said when she was driving by the house, a voice, she said it was like somebody was sitting on her shoulder. She heard an audible voice said, "You need to turn into that driveway."
I
And
wish I could.
she didn't know that I was manifesting her and she was manifesting me. But and like you said, Peter, it's in the chat. That focused attention is the way to open the door for the Spirit of God to enter into your life and not take control of your life, but create with you the life of your dreams.
I don't know if anybody in the chat has anything to say because this has been the most quiet of all the podcasts we have ever done. Normally,
Not even an amen in the chat.
Oh, we got a pal. There's a pal from Johnny Lloyd.
There is a new question that's coming in from Carla Hill there, Dan, and maybe you can expound on this. Maybe this will be our last question for today. How do I turn this principle, transmutation, into one daily actionable habit? What comes to mind when you think about sex transmutation and channeling it, as we've been talking about, into that one thing that you just mentioned here a little bit as well?
You could do a morning routine. It's always good to go to a sacred place every day. This is a sacred place we're in right now. I was going to say that at the beginning, but this is a sacred place. It's a place where transformation takes place. In the morning, first thing in the morning, oftentimes we think of things we're grateful for, but I would add a little bit to that and ask yourself, who am I? Why am I here? What do I really love? What am I grateful for? Who am I? Why am I here? And it's not you, the name. I'm Peter. No, you're a soul on a journey. It doesn't matter if you're a man, a woman, an adult, a child. You're a soul on a journey. Someplace on that journey. Why am I here? What's my purpose? And it should be something that deals with growth and helping others, pouring out energy to other people. What do you really love? What do you really love? What's your passion in life? And what are you grateful for? And that feeling of gratitude, that feeling of fulfillment, that feeling of satisfaction, that feeling of accomplishment is a feeling that you need to associate with the goal of your dreams and pursue it with focused attention and with expectation that it's already yours, because it is. That energy has always been in the universe. That's a whole other lecture, is universal energy. The energy of sex is part of that. Creative intelligence. Tap into it. Focus your attention on it. Make it happen.
Okay, now I have to share this. Your energy lowered a notch in the tonality of your voice has a soothing impact to the ear and the heart and the spirit. And I want to just share with everybody, if you just stop and think about what we've just experienced in this, it's almost an hour. Well, it's about 50 minutes. Can each of you, including our co-hosts, just put one thing in the chat that's a takeaway for you? Just one thing in the chat that is a takeaway for you. And the reason I want you to do that is because a week or two ago, Wyman asked me about the chat. He wanted to go back to the chat. Neither one of us could figure out how to do that on YouTube, and eventually he figured it out. But my point is, I want everybody listening to this today, come back and re-listen and re-listen and re-listen and find from this interview, from this podcast, find a way to tap into your energy in a way that will help you transform it from one form to another. And Dan R. Matthews today has helped us to better understand that it is your focused energy. I have what I call my daily date with myself, and you have absolutely no way of knowing that my 6 books, the one I brought today was that. And this is simply rising. I call it my 5 before 5, rising very early in the morning before 5 and doing 5 things. And you mentioned every single one of them. You mentioned, and I wrote it all in here, right? Dan, the desires of my heart. What am I thankful for? What are my lessons learned, my observations, all of those things in a meditative time and state. And what you have done for me today, we're going to go around to each of the co-hosts and have them share, but what you've done for me today is to help me to better understand that the last 40 plus, almost 50 years of living in this philosophy every single week, I have began to learn to develop the tools to focus my energy every single day, 7 days a week. And it started with a small amount of time, and then a larger and larger and larger amount of time, to now it is hours before the break of day, because I am realizing and I'm learning how to tap into this energy. And I want to just share with all of our listeners that when you think about your desire, what he has just expressed to us today is how how do you manifest whatever it is you desire? One of the ways to do that is to focus that energy. So I'm going to leave that there. Dan, you have been phenomenal. I'm going to go to each of the co-hosts and have them share. And Dan, if you can put in the chat anything you are doing that you'd like for us to share with the world, whether it's a website, a book, a podcast, or anything that you have, if you put it in the chat, we'll share it with everybody. But we really want to bless you today because you have truly been a blessing to us. And Galen and Peter, the books, I usually write 2 or 3 pages. I do have 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 12 so far. Yes. So I am going to go back and re-listen today myself. But I want to go to Galen first and then Peter, any takeaways? And
Yeah.
then for you and how can people connect with you? And then
Yeah,
we'll
this is definitely one that I'm going to go back to as well. I was just thinking about how in my family, we love playing games. We love playing card games, board games. We just love playing games. Always have. And there are some games where you're tempted to say it's a brand new game. I think I know how it goes. Let's just start playing, and you just jump right in without reading the rules. And you can always tell when you're playing against someone or playing with someone who actually knows the rules. This philosophy seems to be the rules of how to be successful on purpose. And you can jump into your life and just start doing things because it makes sense, and perhaps it will work and perhaps you'll have some success. But until you learn the rules, any success that you have will be minor. It will be transient. And again, you just won't have as much success until you learn the rules. And I think Dan really just highlighted for me how universal these laws are. Whether I know them or not, they're going to be at play with or against whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish. So Dan, thank you so much for highlighting that. This is definitely going to be one that I'm going to watch again. My name is Galen Bingham. I'm the leadership strategist. You can find me on almost any platform by typing in my name. But the most fun way to find me is on my podcast, Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership. We are an award-nominated podcast in the area of self-help and accountability. Just really, really excited. We're at this point where we've just closed down season 6. We're getting ready to open season 7. Double dog dare you to try us at least once. Guarantee you that we're gonna share something with you that's gonna help you be a more effective leader. Fantastic conversation. Dr. Peter, I'll go to you next.
Wow, where do I even start? Okay, so much. I want to start here first. Those of you who are watching and you desire more of this type of dialogue, we do a little bit of this at our annual meeting that we have coming up in January in beautiful Boca Raton, Florida. And we hope to see you there on January 3rd and 4th. Please take a look at Eventbrite or even the Think and Grow Rich website in order to dive on in and to see how you can be held accountable for your goals going into 2025. Hey, folks, I am so excited because this conversation was on another level. And even to Ann's point, how Dan's pitch, his tone changed as a result of his content, what he was delivering, and how he was wanting to ensure that it resonated with those of us who were listening and digesting it. And Dan, it resonated with me, sir. So thank you so much for this, especially as I wrote down those 5 areas that you've described. Please allow me to read them back. Who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? What do I really love? And then lastly, but even probably more importantly, what am I grateful for? So thank you so much. Hey, folks, my name is Dr. Peter A. James. I am the high performance coach helping you to shift your mindset. You can find me so many different places. The best place is shiftyourmindset.com, maybe LinkedIn, but more importantly, shiftyourmindset.com. If you would love to be challenged, if you would love to be taken to your next level, perhaps the Own Your Career Challenge is for you. where this type of dialogue that we having here today with Dan is what we do on a regular basis. So go to shiftyourmindset.com/own your career challenge, or just contact me if you need more information. Good stuff. Ann McNeil, wow.
Oh, wow. Wow is the word. Dan, you have been, like I said, such a blessing. But the confirmation for me, and I have to hold up my book again because I've made a commitment to our mastermind group that I will promote this every day, because I never realized when I wrote this the benefit that it has to my clients as they begin the journey. And I actually had one of them to order 70 books for her company employees, because having a product, if you will, that's like a tool, if you will, where we can actually document whatever it is, like you're saying. Who am I? Journal those thoughts. Why am I here? Journal the thoughts. What am I grateful for? Journal the thoughts. What are the desires of my heart? Journal the thought. And just imagine when you take that creative energy and you creatively begin to learn how to transmute that energy from one form to another. And you begin this exercise. It may not be every day, it may start out as once a week and then once every few days. But when you can get into the rhythm of doing this every single day, every single week, every single month, year after year, you cannot begin to imagine what begins to happen as you allow what comes up to come out. And Dan, you helped us to understand why that is so very important. But you also began to help us understand that everything is about love. It is all about love, but it is the spirit of service above self. And that's a Rotarian motto, if you will. But spirit above self, because when we begin to tap into that creative energy, if you will, we begin to learn how to transmute our sex transmutation energy into a more creative energy. I love the writings of Julia Cameron in her book, The Artist's Way, where she does the journal morning pages. But just the self-discovery allows you an opportunity to discover that infinite intelligence from within. And you really walked us through that today. So I want to thank you for that. And for those of you that's interested in connecting, the name of my book is called A Daily Date with Myself. A Daily Date with Myself. And I just want, and to me, it is really fitting to have a daily date with yourself when you think about the subject matter of today. I have an event that I host called the Life and Legacy, where we walk you through this journey, 3 days. And if you're interested in that, the details can be found on my website at annmcneil.com. Again, that is annmcneil.com. But right now, Dan, I'd like to turn this podcast over to you and have you share with our listeners how they can connect with you, and if there's any last thoughts that you'd like to share before we wrap up.
Well, thanks, Anne, and thank you for this time. This has been precious time for me. It sounded like I was speaking to you, but I was really speaking to myself. I was telling myself things that I needed to remember. I needed to be keeping the top of my mind, because we have the power within us to change the world around us, not just in our environment, but literally change the world. We know that there are a lot of forces in the world that are working to move us in a different direction, but we can be beacons of light, and that light energy can change the world. Remember that. If you want to get a hold of me, probably the best way to do it, if you had another question that you wanted something particular that you needed a little more information about, I'm going to give you my email address. And I will get back to you if you ask a question. And it's danrmatthews99@gmail.com. I would encourage you to go to the Napoleon Hill Institute. It's just called napoleonhillinstitute.com, where I have book studies, and there it is right there. What do you really want? And this is affiliated with the Napoleon Hill Foundation, which is the original foundation started by Napoleon Hill in Wise, Virginia. And you can go through the website. I don't know if there's a section someplace in there that where I'm featured, but it doesn't really matter too much. But you'll see something about what the Napoleon Hill Institute is and how you can find out more information about it.
All right. Powerful, powerful, powerful. And Peter, if we can drop his email in the YouTube also. I keep trying to drop it in there, but it won't allow me to
And if
paste.
you and you know, I could see us doing this again sometime. That hour went by just like that. We said an hour. How did an hour go by? What
Listen,
it transcends, what we do transcends space and time. It's more important than the passage of time. And we get caught up in a mastermind. Anybody that watched this watched a mastermind in action, a true mastermind where communication was happening at a level that was not just the spoken word. Things were moving. I could feel it in the hearts of everyone that were here.
listen, Dan, I always like to ask those in the audience that's listening if they would like to have our guests back. Can you put one in the chat? One in the chat on YouTube. Just type the number one in the chat on YouTube if you would like for us to have our guests back. And I don't want to take executive privileges, but I think that our co-hosts are shaking their heads up and down. So along with the co-hosts and the listeners in the audience, we must have you come back. And actually, you started tapping into the next principle when you started talking about the conscious mind, the subconscious mind,
Oh
and
yeah.
that, yes, those principles. So if you would take a moment, Dan, and look at our sign up genius and choose a date and a subject that you would like to come back. I think as I check the chat on YouTube, I think overwhelmingly everybody would love to have you come back.
Well, I'd
Now,
love to be back again.
absolutely. Now, for those of you that's interested in joining us, I have a mastermind that I called McNeil Factor Early Risers. And all we do is just get up a little earlier and do exactly what Dan talked about and have a daily date with ourselves. If you're interested in that, just put two, the number two in the chat, and we will find a way to connect with you and send you an invitation. And I know Galen gets an invite every morning, and he responds. Dr. Pete, I'm not going to talk about you, but anyway, Dan, we intentionally, many of us, and I think we're up to about 30 right now, because I have a couple of these, but we intentionally take time every morning between 3 and 5 a.m. And we intentionally do exactly this exercise that you shared with us today, but I never related it to this principle of the transmutation of the energy. Never really connected that until today in terms of using that time as a way. And it was, the question was asked by Carla Hill in terms of what can we do? And I now understand that we're already doing it. We just didn't call it that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for the clarity, because it's not easy to transmute that energy around a lot of noise.
All
But
things are connected.
absolutely, absolutely. But during the quiet time, you can really have time to tap into that infinite intelligence, that energy. So with those thoughts, we're going to go ahead and prepare to wrap up, and we are going to give everybody the balance of their day back. And Dan is going to choose another time that he can come back and share with us. Galen, Peter, it has been a joy, another podcast, and this is exciting. So Dan, thank you so very much. We're going to share with everybody. Please remember to continue to think and grow richer, and we will see all of you next week on the same podcast, Think and Grow Richer
Thank
Live.
you.
Thank you.
I love you guys.
Oh, thank you. We love you too, Dan.